Friends, would you pray with me? God, we want to seek first your kingdom. We want the intention of our heart to be the rule of your kingship. We want it to be true in our whole world. And so, God, we ask you would start today by ruling right in our hearts. And free us, Lord, to live with your rule in our lives so that way everything that you give to us might also receive the benefit of your rule, of life under the King of Kings. And in that way, God, help us to live in anticipation of the day when you will come again. And every knee will bow and every tongue confess that you are the Lord. Lord, let this day come soon. Until then, strengthen us with these words. Give us a vision and a hope. And set our anchor deeply into the rock that is Jesus Christ. And all God's people said, amen. Friends, our scripture this morning comes from 2 Samuel chapter 5. The first 16 verses. This is one of those parts of the Bible that you don't try, or you probably shouldn't try, until you've been preaching at least for a little while. So I hope I've been preaching for long enough. But there's a few things in here that I've been waiting to bring out for a while. So I'm excited to do that today. One of the reasons that it's tricky, though, is because this is just one of those parts of the Bible that it's just not made. It's just not made for kiddie Bibles. It's way too honest to be a fairy tale. And it's way too complicated to be anything other than real life. We've come a long way since the last couple of weeks. Remember last week we were in the story where the elders came to Samuel and said, we will have a king. Give us a king so we can be like everybody else. Samuel said, this is how it's going to go. It's not going to go so well. And they said, no, but we want a king. Now some time has gone by. King Saul has been crowned. He's come and gone, actually. A few chapters ago, Saul was killed in battle after a couple of after rejecting God. He was killed in battle. And now we're at another place where David, who has already been anointed king by Samuel. In our story today, the elders of Israel come to David and ask him to be their king. So we've really covered some ground, but that's the background. That's what you need to know before you hear this text. So here we are, 2 Samuel chapter 5. As always, the scripture is printed in your bulletin if that helps you to follow along. Otherwise, you can, if it helps, to sit back and close your eyes and drink in the story. If that's you, do that. Basically, just do whatever it takes to listen well. This is the word of the Lord. All the Israelite tribes came to David at Hebron and said, listen, we are your very own flesh and bone. In the past, when Saul ruled over us, you were the one who led us out of Israel, who led Israel out to war and back. What's more, the Lord told you, you will shepherd my people, Israel, and you will be Israel's leader. So all the Israelite leaders came to the king at Hebron. Now King David made a covenant with them at Hebron before the Lord, and they anointed David as king over all Israel. And David was 30 years old when he became king, and he ruled for 40 years. He ruled over Judah for 7.5 years at Hebron, and he ruled 33 years over all Israel and Judah in Jerusalem. Now the king and his troops marched on Jerusalem against the Jebusites, who inhabited the territory. The Jebusites said to David, "You'll never get us in here. Even the blind and the lame will beat you back." "David will never enter here," they said to each other. But David did capture the fortress of Zion, which became David's city. On that day, David said, "Whoever attacks the Jebusites should strike the windpipe, because David hates the lame and the blind." And that's why people say the lame and the blind will not enter the temple. David occupied the fortress, and so it was renamed David's city. David built a city around it from the earthen terraces inward. David grew increasingly powerful, and the Lord of heavenly forces was with him. Tyre's king Hiram sent messengers to David with cedar logs, bricklayers, and carpenters to build David a palace. Then David knew that the Lord had established him as king over all Israel, and that his kingship was held in great honor for the sake of his people Israel. Now, after he left Hebron, David married more secondary wives in Jerusalem and fathered more sons and daughters. The names of his children in Jerusalem were as follows: Shemua, Shobab, Nathan, Salmon, Ibhar, Elishua, Nepheg, Japhia, Elishama, Elida, and Elphat. Friends, this is the word of the Lord. If you are grateful, say thanks be to God. It's complicated. It's complicated. Although I think I might just get this out of the way right at the beginning. One of the reasons I've been waiting to read this text is because I just wanted to say King Hiram. I've been waiting for that one. So here we have let's just kind of get the core things that are happening in this text. Let's just get them really clear. So David is approached by the elders of Israel, right? And they say, so Saul's dead now. And they say, but even when he was alive, they said, you were really the one who led us in battle. You were really our leader even then. And they said, and God said that you would be shepherd. You would be shepherd. So here's one of the key things that we've got to notice here. With this metaphor here, with saying shepherd, this is a nod. This is a nod to the way that God works and frames David's rise to power from a totally obscure, backwoods shepherd boy to now being the shepherd king of all Israel. God is doing something here by pointing out that David the shepherd boy has now become David the shepherd king. It says something about God's mode of leadership. It gives theological weight to the priority of a leader that acts like a good shepherd. You might remember Jesus talking about the good shepherd who lays his life down for the sheep. The good shepherd is the one who knows that his business is first and foremost to take care of the sheep. The bad shepherd is one who simply uses the flock towards his own ends. Now, as the story unfolds, we will see David being both good shepherd and bad shepherd, but shepherd nonetheless. And in setting this up this way, you might also remember, just give us a little toss out, if you remember the story of Nathan, the prophet, who comes to David after Bathsheba, it's not an accident that Nathan uses the metaphor of a shepherd in that story. You can, if you're not familiar, you can catch up with that in chapter 12. But first of all, I just want you to notice that this is how David is being set up here. He's being set up as going from shepherd boy to shepherd king, and all the sort of kingship and the sort of authority and leadership that goes with that. And there's one more thing that I think that draws out here that's really important for each and every one of us today. Because David went from shepherd boy to shepherd king. And all along the way, everything that David did in giving himself to his work of being a shepherd is drawn out in the leadership that God eventually brings him to. And here's why I think that's important. Some of us here live in the real world, right? Where life is lived a lot of times pretty close to the ground. You can't always see that far down the road. And sometimes life can feel like a bit of a grind, right? You're doing your best to put one step in front of the next. And here's why I think this matters for us. David was a faithful shepherd boy. We know this from the different stories about him. We know the way that he took care of those sheep. And we know, and the scripture even gives us some very specific ways that prepared him for the things that he was going to do. It was a preparation for his battle with the Goliath. His time in solitude with the sheep and with his harp gave him practice in songwriting that would become the magisterial psalms that we still draw from today. His care for the sheep would turn into training for the way that he cared for all of God's people. So here's one thing that I think that I want you to take home with you today. Wherever you are right now, lean into it. Whether that is sitting behind the tractor wheel, chopping corn that's still out there standing, or whether you are entering data into a spreadsheet, or whether you're a student, friends, do your work as unto the Lord, because it's valuable in and of itself, and who knows what your faithfulness in this work now might be setting the stage for God to invite you into later. So that's one thing that I want us to start with. David, shepherd king. But then did you notice in the next verse, something else interesting happens. It says, so the Israelite elders came to the king at Hebron. If you were listening carefully, you might think, well, wait a minute. I thought they were coming to ask him to be king. Why does it call him the king already? Well, it's because it's complicated, right? So, Willow, could we get that? Do we have that slide up there? Just the first one. So when the Israelites moved in to the Promised Land, it was set up a little bit. It's a little bit like kind of states in the United States of America. There were these different, smaller regions where each of the tribes were given as their own land, their own space to live in. And what's important about this, and I'll expand on this in a little bit, but one of the things that you need to know is that God was really clear that when this was all set up, when God portioned out the spaces for people to live, God said it's really important that this land stays in the family. God says, so as things go on over time, God says, you know what? There's gonna be business deals, right? Because it's the real world. There's going to be people are going to make some bad decisions sometimes, or there's going to be bad years where some crops fail and others do really well. And God knows that there's going to be marriages and weddings and all kinds of different things going on. So God knows that the land that is not going to just stay totally simple like this. It's going to get moved around a little bit. But God says, in the world the way God wants it, God says everybody needs to have some of their own space. And so God actually said every 50 years, the land that's changed places, if there's been land that's moved outside of the family, every 50 years it goes back. And so the map kind of gets reset every 50 years. And the point here for God is that everybody has their own ground that they can work so that they can support themselves and their family. All right, so that's the first little bit. Second, so you see up here, this is a little bit complicated. This, all the kind of the more colorful stuff, this is the whole region of Israel. But as you can see, there are different tribes in different places. And let's go to the next slide. For a lot of Israel's time, Israel isn't just one happy place. Mostly it's divided into two regions called Judah and Israel. Now Judah is the darker gray spot at the bottom, and Israel is the white spot that's up on top. So here's why this matters for us for today. King Saul, was never set up as a king of Judah. The only place that he ever had kingship of was the area of Israel. And the reason that our text today says King David is because David has already, after David was anointed as king by Samuel, after that time, David was anointed king of Judah. Okay? Are we tracking here? So then after Saul dies, Judah still kind of has a king, but Israel, which is, as you can see, the larger part with the most tribes in it, they don't have a king. So it's the elders from the northern part, the part of, it's called Israel, but it doesn't actually mean all of Israel. It means Israel, not Judah. Israel, those elders are the ones that come to David. And you'll notice that they don't come with a lot of demands. You would think that being the stronger and the bigger half of the country, they might have come with a little more chutzpah and a little more, a few more demands about maybe making sure that they get their own slice of the pie. But they come really humbly. And they say, listen, we're family. We're flesh and blood. Which they're actually not. But they say so. They're like leaning into this they're leaning into what they want to be true. And they say, listen, we're family. Would you be our king? And then it says, so David made a covenant with them. And because it says David made covenant with them, shows really clearly that David is the one with the upper hand here. David is consolidating his power over, for the first time, all of Israel. For the first time, all of Israel is united under one king, and this is a really big deal. There's only two kings that this is true. There were only two kings. David and his son Solomon were the only two kings that were ever king over this whole area, Israel and Judah together. Before them and after them, it split apart. So like I said, it's complicated. It's complicated. When we look at these things, when we think about Israel, it's easy to think that, after the tribes came out of Egypt, they formed Israel, and that's just what it was from then on out. But it's more complicated. It's more complicated than that. The next thing that's really important that we've spent some time talking about is the significance of David conquering Jerusalem. Now, Jerusalem, can you go back one slide? No, I didn't grab the pointer up here, but if you see, so maybe you can see right in the middle, there's this blue spot called Benjamin. Jerusalem, that's where Jerusalem is. But there was something funny about Jerusalem, because Jerusalem was not, even though it was part of the tribe of Benjamin, it was not captured. It wasn't captured when the people moved into the land. Thanks.
Do you need help?
It's not lighting up.
On the side?
Yeah.
On the right side?
Yep, it's not. It's all right.
Okay.
Jerusalem was not captured by the Benjaminites. And there are a couple of reasons for that. One, it was a really significant city already when they moved in, so it was hard to capture. But there's something else here, and it's this. God had given the charge to the people of Israel to completely drive out everyone that was in the land. And there's some complicated stuff here, but work with me for a little bit. Their charge was to move everyone out from the land. And this was one place. There were a couple different places throughout Israel where that was not quite followed. Jerusalem was one of them. The Benjaminites allowed the Jerusalem, the Jebusites, to retain control of that city. Which at first blush might sound like, well, maybe they were just being nice and letting them stay there. But there's more to it than that. Because by letting that city remain as it was, provided a powerful economic engine for the people of Benjamin. So by not carrying out God's will as he had revealed it really clearly, they traded carrying out God's will for some quick economic and political gains by letting it sit there. Now there's someone from the tribe of Benjamin that we've been talking about a little bit, and his name is Saul. It's interesting that Saul's downfall as a Benjaminite was also one of making the same exact mistake, probably one that he had inherited. The mistake of cutting corners on God's justice for his own political and financial gain. And so this is the first reason why it's important to see that David, the first true king of all of Israel, he's the one that goes into Jerusalem and finishes the job that God had laid out for them. There's something else, though, that's very interesting here. Because Jerusalem was not taken in the very beginning, Jerusalem, remember what happens to all this land every 50 years? It gets redivided back to the original families. Jerusalem wasn't part of that. So that means that when David takes the city of Jerusalem, the whole thing is David's. David and David's line forever. It's never going to be traded out to anyone outside of David's family. It's just David's. Okay, stick that in your back pocket for a minute. It was also just kind of a smart thing for David to choose Jerusalem because Jerusalem was politically independent before he took it over, and it was also sat right halfway between the two kingdoms. It allowed him a really effective place to govern. So that's sort of some of the clear things about this text and how it moves forward, moves the story of God in Israel and God's people, how it moves that forward. But there's something that we've got to look at if we're going to look at this story. And it's about the way that Jesus and David are connected. See, David and Jesus both go to Jerusalem to establish the rule of God. And they both clear the place of those who defile it. But there's one group of people whose outcome is totally different between David and Jesus. And that's the blind and the lame. David, the best king that Israel ever had, the archetype, the one that everyone else wants to be like, he's got these pretty awful hatred. I would even call it bigotry towards the blind and the lame. Now, it is complicated. At the time of David, any sort of the lameness or blindness was seen as God's judgment. It was complicated, but But the thing that has stuck out to me about this passage is how when David goes into Jerusalem, part of his setting up shop is by getting rid of everyone who seems like they can't pull their own weight. And when Jesus goes into Jerusalem, he goes and he reaches down and he lifts those people up and he heals them, which is really good news for you and for me. Because, friends, we are in Jerusalem, the spiritually blind and the spiritually lame. And under the old rule, David looks at us and he says, you know what? Strike the windpipe. Send him packing. But friends, we live in the shadow of the New Jerusalem, a Jerusalem where Jesus is king. And when Jesus is king, Jesus sees every weakness that you and I have, not as a threat, not as something not as a reason to count you out, but as a way to move towards you, as a way to move towards us, as part of His vision to make all things well. Jesus went into Jerusalem, the son of David. He literally owned the city. And yet he gave up his life there for you and for me and for the whole world. Instead of demanding life of those who can't keep it, he gave his life for those who can't save it. Friends, this is just a few of the ways that the story of the Bible, the whole story of the Bible, comes together as one story. And the center of it all, we find Jesus Christ, the one who is the true King, who reigns, and the one for whom we wait for the new Jerusalem to come down from heaven to be established on this world, where all things are made right, where all things are made well, where the gates of the city are never shut, but they are always open. The light comes not from the sun of the heavens, but from the Son of God. Friends, this is the end of the story. And all of those who hope in it now, all of those who put their trust in Jesus today, friends, listen to me. This is your hope. This is your anchor. This is the solid rock that you can anchor yourself to in the storms of life. That this King, this Jesus, is coming. He's coming again. He's coming in power. And when he comes, all things will be made well. And all God's people said, amen. So Lord, come soon. Because the world is still really messed up. And we need your healing rule among us. God, set your rule and establish your rule in our hearts and in our lives, in our community, in our church. So that way, in every way, we might be ready for that day when we see you. Lord, I pray these things